Number 1.
It was October 22 of 1966, and many of the citizens of Tallahassee, Florida, were attending a football game in the North Florida Fair. But not the Sims. The two older daughters, aged 17 and 16, were out babysitting. At their home in Muriel Court Drive were Robert Sims, 42, his wife Helen, 34, and youngest daughter Joy, 12. It was supposed to be a normal quiet night, but it was anything but. At around 11:15 p.m., Jenny Sims arrived home from babysitting to an incomprehensible scene. Robert was lying on top the bed, blindfolded, gagged and bound, with one shot wound in his head. He was still alive, but not for long. Helen was on the floor, also blindfolded, gagged and bound, and had been shot 3 times, twice in the head and once in the leg. She was also still breathing, but would die 9 days later at the hospital, without ever regaining consciousness. Joy got the worst of it. Not only had she been shot in the head, but was also stabbed at least 6 times in the torso. Her underwear was pulled down, suggesting sexual assault. She was already dead. It looked like the attacks hadn't happened too long before Jenny got home, which was later confirmed by a neighbor who claimed to have heard screams at around 10:45 p.m. Investigators at the crime scene said that there was no sign of forced entry and nothing had been stolen. There was even money left in plain view. Whoever had done this seemed to know the Sims and had a personal motive for the murders. Among some of the interesting evidence found at the crime scene, the knots used to bound the Sims was a specialized kind. Former Assistant State Attorney Jeremy Mutz claimed in a Reddit post in 2017 that everything indicated that the murders had been planned, that the killer or killers had spent time cleaning the scene, and suggested that it would have to be someone who would feel comfortable being seen at the neighborhood without raising suspicions. The crime shocked the community, leading even to cancel trick-or-treating that year out of fear that there was a killer still on the loose. No one could understand who would want to target a well-liked family with no known enemies at first. The investigation focused on a high-profile member of the city, Pastor C.A. Roberts. Helen had worked for him at the First Baptist Church, but had quit her job just a few days before she was murdered. The reason of why she resigned was a mystery, but there was a lot of speculation that she disapproved of Robert's philandering ways, in fact, his affairs with many local women, and being considered a suspect in this crime eventually destroyed his career. However, Pastor Roberts had been at the football game. Not only had he been seen by many witnesses in both halves of the game, but there was video footage of him there. Other potential suspects were a young couple that lived in the same neighborhood as the Sims. Mary Charles Lajoie, 19 at the time, was described as odd and obsessed with death. In fact, she'd been caught several times breaking in funeral homes. Her boyfriend, Vernon Fox Jr., 21 at the time, was called a loner and was suspected of being a peeping Tom. He was even spotted peeping on Joy Sims a week before the murders. In the 80s, Mary Charles went back to Tallahassee to voluntarily talk to the investigators and suggested that Vernon, by then her husband, had committed the murders. Her motives to turn on him were dubious, especially when she showed interest in the reward money. Still, there was plenty of reason to suspect them, considering they kept giving conflicting statements to the police, but there was no hard evidence that would lead to an arrest. Vernon has always denied his involvement in the murders and has been actively commenting on the case online. He also gave an interview for a documentary on the case called 641 Muriel Court. The murders of the Sims remain unsolved.
Number 2.
On October 23, 2012, 18-year-old Vanessa "Honey" Malone was shot 2 times at a friend's apartment in Stone Mountain, Georgia during a supposed robbery. However, the circumstances of her death raised many suspicions that it was planned. Earlier that night, Honey's mother, Flora Malone, picked her up from her job. Honey stated that she was extremely tired and was going to sleep once they got to their home, but when she was in her room, Honey got ready to hang out with a few of her friends. According to Honey's mom, this was unusual for Honey since she would be true to her words. Honey left her house and a few minutes later she came back to say "I love you." This was very odd to Flora since Honey would have to turn around to say that. Several minutes later, after Honey had left, she started to get a very bad feeling that something was going on and, right after she got the feeling she heard what she believed was fireworks. Flora went to call her two daughters but found that Honey's phone was turned off, which wasn't unusual, but Honey's phone had been turned off all day. When Flora called her other daughter, she heard a knock at the door. The person at the door was Honey's ex-boyfriend and his friend. They stated that something had happened. Now, at the scene there was two of Honey's friends, a man named Donald Ash and an unnamed woman. They both claimed that there was a robbery gone wrong. They started that either 3 or 5 to 6 people, in all black, kicked the door in and tied them up and placed them into the bathroom. Later, Honey entered the apartment and was shot 2 times and had her body dragged across multiple rooms and then placed on top of dirty clothes. The police found blood that didn't match Honey's, and someone claimed to see a person limping while being helped by another person. The police was unable to find any documents of a person in hospitals for any injury. Later the police noticed some points to the stories. For example, one stated that there was 3 people, while the other said 5 to 6. Also one said that they were tied up with a belt, while the other said an electrical cord. Also, nothing in the apartment was stolen, only Honey's phone was, and it was found about a mile away. Honey's sister stated that Ash was a rather violent person and the fact that he didn't fight off was rather odd. Honey's family and friends said that Honey wouldn't have entered the apartment that has a kicked-in door. It also didn't make any sense that she was the only one killed in a robbery. Also, the robbers dragged her body around the apartment instead of escaping. Her family believes that she was lured out. 7 years later, Ash was arrested for an unrelated charge and police confiscated a gun. They tested the gun and found out that it was the same gun used to kill Honey. They then tested Ash's blood, and it was a match to the blood they found outside. Ash, in April of 2020, was arrested for second-degree murder and withholding evidence. However, the police believe that there was more to Honey's murder. They believe that at least 2 more people were in on it, and they also need a motive. People believe that Honey had something that she wasn't supposed to know, or something was on her phone. Even with 1 person in prison for her murder, police believe that there's much more to the case.
Number 3.
Jacklyn Dowaliby was the 7-year-old daughter of Cynthia Dowaliby, an adopted daughter of her second husband, David. On September 10, 1988, David and his son awoke early. They made sure to stay quiet and not wake the rest of the family, including his mother who lived in the basement. However, at 7:15 a.m., David discovered the front door partially open. At first, he thought that his mother had come home earlier and left the door open. Her car was not in the driveway, but he then assumed that she had left again while leaving the door open. 2 hours later, Cynthia went into Jacklyn's room to wake her. However, Jacklyn was not in her room. They initially assumed that she was out playing with friends. After searching the home, David and his son went out searching for Jacklyn. They could find no trace of her. When Cynthia went back into Jacklyn's room, she discovered that her comforter was missing, which was unusual as Jacklyn would not take it with her to go outside. When Cynthia walked down her driveway to go to a neighbor's house, she noticed that the basement window had been broken. It appeared that an intruder had used it to gain entrance to the house. Within hours, the police and FBI were at the Dowaliby household, waiting for a ransom demand. However, no call came. 4 days later, Jacklyn's body was discovered in a vacant field near Blue Island, Illinois. Found at the scene was Jacklyn's comforter and nightgown, along with rope that was around Jacklyn's neck. From the beginning, the investigation into Jacklyn's disappearance was 2-pronged. While they pursued the possibility of a kidnapping, they began a detailed questioning of both Cynthia and David. The questions involved what the Dowalibys did the morning of Jacklyn's disappearance. Investigators believed that the basement window was broken from the inside to make it look like an intruder was responsible. Dust on the windowsill had not been disturbed. On September 11, the day after Jacklyn's disappearance, David agreed to take a polygraph examination at FBI headquarters in Chicago. An agent told David that he had passed the examination. 3 days passed with no new leads. On the day that Jacklyn's body was found, David was asked to take another polygraph. The results of this test were inconclusive, with the examiner claiming that David was uncooperative. David, however, claimed that the examiner told him to answer yes to every question, including the question, "Did you kill your daughter?" to which David said he refused to respond with yes. After the second polygraph, David was interrogated for 5 hours before an officer interrupted. The officer said that Jacklyn's body was found. David believed that the police officers were lying to him in order to get him to confess. However, when he came home to find Cynthia crying, he knew that the news was true. An autopsy was unable to determine when Jacklyn was murdered. On September 17, she was laid to rest. The investigation now involved the Illinois State Police, the Midlothian Police, and the Blue Island Police. For 2 months, they gathered evidence and built a case against the Dowalibys. Finally, in November 1988, David and Cynthia Dowaliby were arrested and charged with Jacklyn's murder. Cynthia was 2 months pregnant. The couple insisted that they were innocent. In April 1990, David and Cynthia Dowaliby went on trial for Jacklyn's murder. The prosecution had built its case mainly on circumstantial evidence. One prosecution witness, a transit worker named Everett Mann, had picked David out of a photo lineup. He claimed that on the night of Jacklyn's murder, he had seen a man with a prominent nose, like David's, sitting in a parked car near the site where Jacklyn's body was found. The defense felt that this identification was ridiculous. Everett was at least 75 feet away from the car, and it was a dark, moonless night. Also, the photo spread that Everett was shown were frontal photographs, even though Everett saw the person from a side view. David's photograph was also larger than the other 4 photographs. Before the trial, 2 other eyewitnesses claimed that they had seen Cynthia's car near the area where Jacklyn's body was found. However, these sightings were discredited because it was confirmed that Cynthia's car was in front of the Dowaliby home at the time of the sightings. Another issue in the prosecution case involved the basement window. A forensic analysis was done on the window to determine if it had been broken from the inside or the outside of the home. The report concluded that the window had actually been broken from the outside, but by this time, the Dowalibys had already been arrested. The prosecution also questioned whether it was possible for someone to enter the house without disturbing the items below the basement window. There were several items including a nightstand, towel rack, TV tray, and makeup tray. None of these items were disturbed. To prove that this was possible, David shot a video showing a neighbor entering through the basement window. The neighbor was able to wedge his leg on the wall and enter without disturbing anything. Other prosecution evidence included a blood-stained pillow found in Jacklyn's bedroom, head hairs similar to Jacklyn's found in the trunk of her parents' car, her brother claiming that she got spanked a lot by their parents, and a neighbor identifying the rope that killed Jacklyn as one that her brother often played with. However, the blood on the pillow could not be identified, and the hairs could not be confirmed as coming from Jacklyn's. The defense focused on a convicted sex offender, Perry Hernandez, who committed a similar abduction 1 year after Jacklyn's murder. The Dowalibys never testified during the trial. Before closing arguments, the judge addressed both legal teams without the jury present. He decided that the case against David Dowaliby would continue as scheduled. However, he felt that there was insufficient evidence for Cynthia's case to be put to the jury. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding David Dowaliby guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Cynthia and friends of the family created a grassroots movement in an attempt to get David released. The movement caught the attention of legal journalist David Protas. In several articles, he criticized the conviction of David Dowaliby. Paul Hogan worked with Protas to create a series of investigative journalism reports in an attempt to get David Dowaliby released. In October 1991, Illinois Court of Appeals reversed David's conviction and ordered him to be released. However, some investigators are still convinced that David Dowaliby is responsible for Jacklyn's murder. David and Cynthia Dowaliby are still searching for Jacklyn's real killer. Unresolved. After the broadcast, 2 viewers called the telecenter and refuted the alibi of one of the original suspects. This suspect was Timothy Guess, Jacklyn's biological uncle. Guess, a diagnosed schizophrenic, claimed that he was working at a local restaurant on the night of Jacklyn's murder. However, at least 5 regular patrons of the restaurant have stated that Guess was not there that night. Also, one of Guess's original alibi witnesses has since changed her story. Guess also had links to the apartment next to where Jacklyn's body was found. Jacklyn's case was reopened by the state attorney's office, however, charges were never filed against Guess. According to journalist David Protus, Guess later told him that a spirit that lived inside him had told him details about Jacklyn's murder. Guess told Protus about the layout of the Dowaliby home, even though he had never been inside. He also knew that a light was on in Jacklyn's closet, but not her bedroom. This detail was never released to the public. Despite the evidence against him, Guess was never charged. He died in 2002. Another suspect, convicted sex offender Perry Hernandez, was investigated. He had committed a similar abduction 1 year after Jacklyn's murder. However, evidence found on Jacklyn's body did not match him, and he was cleared by authorities. The Dowalibys have since moved and changed their last names due to publicity from the case. They still hope that Jacklyn's murder can be solved. Officially, Jacklyn's case remains unsolved.
Number 4.
On December 1, 1971, a man named John Carnes arrived at 1318 N LaSalle Street in Indianapolis. Carnes and others became concerned when business partners Bob Gearse and Bob Hinson didn't show up for work at their microfilm company. The men owned a business called B&B Microfilm Service, also in Indianapolis at 4446 E 10th Street. Hinson and Gearse also lived together at the LaSalle residence. Louise Cole, their secretary, saw her 2 employers the previous evening. She said both men had stayed late working on an important project. Cole assumed they would show up later. However, others became concerned when they couldn't locate the 2 business partners. After being unable to reach the men at work or home, Carnes showed up at their home to do a wellness check. He entered the home after finding the door ajar. He described his findings to police as inhuman. Hinson and Gearse were both in their bedrooms. Someone had struck them in their heads and then cut their throats from ear to ear. There was also a deceased third man in the bathroom named James Barker. He was friends with both victims and worked in sales for a microfilm company called Bell and Howell. Someone had also savagely killed him. 2 of the men were nearly decapitated. The police located a bloody boot print left behind by the killer. Whoever killed the 3 men already had a head start on getting away with this triple homicide. Indianapolis police officers immediately began looking at different motives. Why would anyone kill these men? It's possible the victims knew their killer because there weren't any signs of forced entry. The police also think the crime may have involved more than one killer. It seemed unlikely that one person could have killed all 3 men. Secretary Louise Cole said she had left the office the previous evening around 5:15 p.m. She said Hinson and Gearse were both working when she left. The police also interviewed a man named Theodore B. Euland who said he spoke to Hinson at 9 p.m. and then Gearse around 9:30 p.m. The police thought Euland had the strongest motive for killing the men. Hinson and Gearse previously worked for Euland at Records Security. It's alleged the men stole equipment and at least one client from Euland before leaving him. According to retired Indianapolis police officer Robert Snow, Euland wanted to find someone to kill the men and then collect on their life insurance policies. Snow mentioned Euland as a suspect in his book, titled Slaughter on North LaSalle. Euland may have also had a financial motive because he carried a life insurance policy on his 2 former employees. The police discovered another angle. This one involved the hard partying lifestyles of the victims. They often frequented bars after work and got into fights with other bar patrons. Police also learned the men were involved in an unusual contest. They competed to see who could sleep with the most women. At the end of every month, the men recorded their conquests. However, they died before recording November's numbers. Apparently, Barker led with 25, then Gearse with 20 and Hinson trailing with 18. Did a jealous boyfriend or husband kill the men? It seemed possible. A woman who was seeing Hinson said she stopped by the house to visit him at 1 a.m. She left after no one answered the door. If true, this left a window between 9:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. for someone to commit the murders. During the 1970s, forensics didn't exist. This meant the police had to knock on doors and speak to hundreds of people. The LaSalle Street case went cold. This upcoming December will mark the 49-year anniversary of the LaSalle Street triple homicide. Today, the police have arrested no one. Unfortunately, the police lost bloody sheets and other pertinent evidence containing crucial DNA evidence. In 2000, the daughter of a man named Fred Harbison was going through her late father's lockbox and found a sealed letter. Her father, who once worked for Theodore Euland, wrote a confession letter. His daughter read it. Harbison claimed Euland became angry with Hinson and Gears because they wanted to ruin him. Euland hired Harbison to kill the men for their life insurance. Harbison claimed Euland never paid him for killing the two men. Today, the murders of these men remain unsolved. And I don't foresee anyone ever facing justice for killing Bob Gears, Bob Hinson or James Barker. Including Euland and Harbison, most of the people involved with this case are now deceased.
Number 5.
An Iowa sheriff who led the investigation into a 31-year-old double homicide says he's apprehensive about a crime-solving reality television show that will feature the case in an episode Friday. But Jasper County Sheriff John Hafferty said he's also expecting to hear from the show's viewers, who could have useful tips to aid the investigation into the 1983 slayings of Stephen Fisher, 20, and Melisa Gregory, 17. A case is never over. You're always looking for more information. You always have unanswered questions, Hafferty said. I'm hopeful that the show will create some additional leads. Solving homicide cases that are several years or decades old is rarely easy, crime experts say, and making an arrest and getting a conviction can be even more difficult. In Iowa, for instance, a website that tracks cold cases lists more than 500 victims. Since 2012, Iowa authorities have gotten convictions or closed at least 4 cold cases, according to Jody Ewing, founder of Iowa Cold Cases. The difficulty in solving an old homicide case is why Hafferty welcomed help from investigators with TNT's true crime show Cold Justice. The show's cast members spent 8 days in Jasper County in February, reviewing evidence and interviewing witnesses while filming their work. Teresa Supino, 53, was arrested March 3 and charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Fisher and Gregory. Supino was married to Fisher, and investigators believe her anger over Fisher and Gregory's relationship led to the killings, which occurred at the Copper Dollar Ranch northwest of Newton, Iowa. The Cold Justice episode includes segments of an interview with Supino that investigators conducted in a vehicle in a parking lot outside Supino's Altoona apartment, said Kelly Siegler, the Texas prosecutor who stars in the show. Supino's family doesn't think the show will feature any revelatory evidence that will convince viewers of her guilt. Supino's daughter, Casey Supino, said she thought the show would provide only a glimpse of circumstantial and hearsay evidence that points to her mother's involvement. They didn't solve it, she said. I think that they had to charge somebody for it, and they don't have anything. Stephen Addington, Supino's attorney with the State Public Defender's Office, declined to comment. The Supino case is one of at least 9 now making their way through Iowa's courts in which arrests were made in years-old homicides, said Ewing, of Iowa Cold Cases. Legal experts say several factors can make a cold case difficult for prosecutors and defense attorneys to take to trial. Sometimes in such cases, witnesses can't be located or have died, and memories of those who do testify can prove shaky, said Denise Timmons, an assistant Iowa attorney general who prosecuted Pilcher. When Supino goes to trial, the case may face similar issues. Witnesses whom investigators would want, such as the ranch foreman who discovered the bloodied bodies of Fisher and Gregory, and the medical examiner who examined the bodies, are dead, Hafferty said. Hafferty said he's seen a rough cut of the episode that will air Friday, but he's been tight-lipped about how Cold Justice investigators aided in the investigation. The show features prosecutor Siegler, veteran crime scene investigator Yolanda McClary, and Johnny Bonds, a retired Houston homicide detective. Teresa Supino has long maintained that the deaths were tied to drug trafficking at the ranch, an element of the case that will be explored in Friday night's episode, according to the Cold Justice website. However, cold cases are often solved using circumstantial evidence, Siegler said. Court papers filed in the case indicate that prosecutors have witnesses who will testify about Supino's anger about her husband's new relationship, and at least one witness could testify that Supino told her me and my brother killed someone.